History has not been kind to Pope Pius XII. For decades, his name has been wrapped in controversy, his legacy divided between accusation and defense. To some, he remains the silent pope, the man who failed to speak loudly enough while millions of Jewish lives were being erased in the darkness of the Holocaust. To others, he was a shepherd forced to walk a narrow path between truth and survival, choosing quiet action over public confrontation, saving lives in secret while the world demanded words. Books were written, plays were staged, films reignited old wounds. Again and again, the same question echoed through time. Why did he not speak? Yet, history often judges by what is heard, not by what is endured. It listens to speeches, not to prayers whispered in the night. It records declarations, not tears shed before the altar. But what if the Pope was listening to voices the world could not hear? What if in the silence that so many condemned, there were cries not meant for human ears, cries that rose instead to heaven? What if the truth of his conscience was written not in documents or headlines, but in encounters known only to God? On a night when Rome slept under the shadow of war, when fear lingered even within the walls of the Vatican, Pope Pius XII knelt alone in prayer. Outside, the world accused him. Inside, his heart carried the weight of souls he could not save, and those he had saved but could never name. It was on that night, according to sacred testimony whispered through generations, that heaven broke its silence, not with thunder, not with judgment, but with the gentle presence of a soul who had walked through the fire of history and returned not for honor, not for revenge, but for truth. A nun would appear, a victim of Auschwitz, a daughter of Israel who became a bride of Christ. She did not come to accuse the Pope. She came to tell her story, and through it, the story of millions the world had forgotten to hear. And from that night forward, the silence of Pope Pius XII would never again be empty. Before this story continues, we invite you to pause for just a moment. If there is a soul you wish to pray for, a loved one, a forgotten priest, a victim of war, or someone who died without comfort, please write their name in the comments below. We will personally offer Mass intentions for these souls, and we ask you to unite your prayer with ours. Let this story not only be heard, but become a prayer for those who can no longer speak for themselves. The war did not wait for Pope Pius XII to find his footing. He had barely ascended to the chair of Peter when Europe ignited in flames, and with it came a burden few men in history had ever carried. The fate of souls weighed against the survival of the Church itself. From every direction, pressure closed in. From Berlin came threats disguised as diplomacy. From the Allied world came expectations of open condemnation. From within the Church came fear that one wrong word would bring destruction upon Catholics living under Nazi rule. And from the future, unseen but relentless, came the judgment of history. Soon, accusations followed him like shadows. He is too cautious, he is too silent, he is complicit. Journalists wrote columns that burned with moral certainty. Intellectuals debated his conscience in lecture halls. Even some within the Church whispered that the Vicar of Christ had chosen safety over prophecy. They demanded words. They demanded thunder. They demanded a pope who would shout across the world, even if the shout cost thousands of hidden lives. But they did not see the letters that could not be published. They did not hear the cries that reached him in secret reports from Poland, Germany, and the camps. They did not know the names of those sheltered in convents, monasteries, and Vatican corridors, people who lived only because the Pope had chosen the path of shadows rather than the path of applause. To the world, Pius XII appeared still, but inside him raged a war no map could record, the war between conscience and consequence, between speaking and saving. By day, he stood before diplomats and cardinals. By night, he stood before God. And on one such night, when the echoes of accusation still rang in his ears, the Pope did not kneel before history. He did not kneel before critics. He did not kneel before the powers of this world. That night, the Pope knelt, not before the world, but before God.
The Vatican had long fallen asleep, but Pope Pius XII remained awake. Kneeling in the small private chapel beside his room, he prayed in silence deeper than words. Outside those walls, the world argued about him. Inside, he carried the weight of souls no argument could ease. Each breath felt heavy with names he could not forget. Children, mothers, fathers, priests, all swallowed by the machinery of war. The candles flickered. The air grew strangely still. Then, without warning, the silence changed. It was not the sound of footsteps, nor the echo of a door. It was as if the very light in the chapel softened, bending toward something unseen. A gentle radiance appeared near the altar, not brilliant like triumph, but quiet, wounded, and solemn. From that light stepped the figure of a woman. She wore the habit of a Carmelite nun, yet there was no crown of glory upon her head, no sign of victory, only the dignity of one who had walked through fire and returned carrying the scars of history. Her face was peaceful, but her eyes held a sorrow deeper than tears. The Pope rose slowly, his heart pounding. He did not feel fear, he felt recognition, as if his soul knew this moment had been prepared long before. The woman bowed her head gently. For a long breath, neither spoke. The world beyond the chapel ceased to exist. Then, without warning, the silence changed. It was not the sound of footsteps, nor the echo of a door. It was as if the very light in the chapel softened, bending toward something unseen. A gentle radiance appeared near the altar, not brilliant like triumph, but quiet, wounded, and solemn. From that light stepped the figure of a woman. She wore the habit of a Carmelite nun, yet there was no crown of glory upon her head, no sign of victory, only the dignity of one who had walked through fire and returned carrying the scars of history. Her face was peaceful, but her eyes held a sorrow deeper than tears. The Pope rose slowly, his heart pounding. He did not feel fear, he felt recognition, as if his soul. I was once Edith Stein. I was born into a Jewish family that loved tradition, learning, and faith. My childhood was filled with the prayers of my people, the stories of our ancestors, the quiet strength of a mother who trusted in God even when life was hard. For many years, I believed as my family believed, not because I questioned, but because I belonged. Then came my 14th year, and with it, doubt. I did not reject God in anger. I simply could no longer feel Him in the words I had inherited. My mind hungered for truth more than for comfort, and so I turned away, not from my people, but from belief itself. I chose reason over revelation, philosophy over prayer. I wanted answers that could withstand every question. And so I studied, I searched, I thought my way through the night.
I became a philosopher, a teacher, a woman convinced that truth must be proven, not received. Yet even in my certainty, there was a quiet ache, the feeling that reason alone could not heal the deepest wounds of the human heart. It was through friendship that Christ first came near to me, not through argument, but through kindness, not through sermons, but through lives quietly transformed by love. Still, I hesitated, until one evening, in a house that was not mine, I found a book that would change everything, The Life of Saint Teresa of Avila. I read through the night, unable to stop, and when I closed the final page, I whispered the words that would reshape my destiny. This is the truth. From that moment, my search ended and my surrender began. Holy Father, I did not abandon my people when I followed Christ. I carried them with me into his wounds. I carried their questions into his silence. I carried their suffering to his cross. I did not abandon my people, I tell you now. I carried them with me to the cross. And it was there, in the shadow of that cross, that my life would find its meaning, and my death its voice. After I found Christ, everything changed, yet nothing changed all at once. I did not run immediately to the convent. I remained a scholar, a teacher of philosophy, standing before students who trusted my words, even as my own heart was learning to trust a new way of seeing the world. I lived between two worlds, the world of reason that had shaped me, and the world of grace that had begun to claim me. In 1922, I knelt and received baptism. The water touched my forehead quietly. There were no trumpets, no public celebration, only a soul stepping across an invisible threshold, from searching to belonging, from questioning to surrender. I felt no triumph. I felt peace. A peace that did not erase my past, but redeemed it. For years, I continued to teach, to write, to think. Yet slowly, another call grew within me. A call not to speak more loudly, but to become smaller, to disappear so that God might be seen, to choose the hidden life. In 1934, I laid down everything the world had given me, my lectures, my titles, my future as a philosopher, and I stepped into the silence of Carmel. There, behind walls no one noticed, I received a new name, Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. Not Teresa of comfort, not Teresa of success, but Teresa blessed by the cross. Some thought I was escaping the world. They were wrong. I was entering it more deeply than ever before. Because the cross does not remove us from suffering, it places us at its center. And I understood then that my life would not be measured by books I published or students I impressed, but by souls I would carry in silence. I did not take my vows to be forgotten. I took them to remember those the world would forget. I offered my hidden life for those who would die without witnesses, for children whose names would vanish in smoke, for mothers who would whisper prayers in languages no one would record, for fathers who would walk into darkness with dignity and fear. My cloister was not a refuge from history, it was my place within it. And when I knelt in the quiet chapel of my convent, I knew that one day my path would lead beyond those walls, not by my own choosing, but by the will of God. I did not yet know Auschwitz by name, but I already knew the cross, and I had chosen it, not to hide from the world, but to carry the world where no one else would.
In the mystery of that final hour, a moment unfolded that no human eyes could fully see, Yet heaven itself could never forget. It was the moment when a soul stood before eternity, not judged yet, not condemned, but offered one last chance to return. The guardians of that soul were present. The angel who had walked beside him since birth stood in silent sorrow. For years, that angel had whispered warnings, inspired remorse, and carried prayers to the throne of God. Now, at the edge of time, tears filled the eyes of heaven's messenger. Across that unseen threshold, the enemy also waited, not with noise, not with fire, but with a terrible stillness. The devil did not need to shout. He only needed the soul to remain proud. The final breath was near. In that fragile space between life and eternity, grace reached out once more, not with force, but with love, not with fear, but with mercy. A gentle invitation echoed in the depths of the soul. Return, you are still loved. But the heart that had spent a lifetime resisting did not soften. The man's final words were not words of repentance. They were not words of surrender. They were the last echo of a will that refused to kneel. I need no forgiveness, the soul seemed to say. I answer to no one. And in that tragic freedom, the choice was sealed. The angel bowed its head in grief, not in anger, not in accusation, but in sorrow too deep for tears. The devil did not celebrate. There was no laughter, no triumph, only a cold acceptance, as if even hell understood the weight of a soul that had chosen darkness over light. Then, quietly, without thunder or flame, the door closed. Not slammed, not forced, simply closed, by the very hand that had been offered mercy until the end. Far away in the small village of Ars, St. John Vianney felt the moment pass like a wound through his heart. He did not see it with his eyes, but his soul understood what had been lost. He covered his face and wept. Not because God had failed, not because mercy had been weak, but because love, in all its power, had been refused. And in that terrible stillness, the priest learned a truth that would follow him for the rest of his life. The greatest tragedy is not that God cannot save, but that a soul can choose not to be saved.
Holy Father, there are things no words should ever have to carry. And yet, if they are not spoken, they are lost, not only to history, but to the hearts of those who must remember. I will not describe what the eyes were forced to see. I will tell you what the soul was forced to hear. In the chambers, there were no speeches, no final explanations, only the sound of breathing that slowly became prayer. Some cried out the names of their children. Some whispered the Shema, the ancient words of Israel that had traveled through centuries of suffering and hope. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Others did not even have the strength to speak. Their lips moved without sound, forming prayers only heaven could understand. There were those who tried to comfort strangers, women who had never met before, holding hands as if they had known each other all their lives. There were fathers who stood taller than fear, so their sons would not see them tremble. There were mothers who sang quietly, not to be heard, but to keep despair from swallowing their children whole. And there were many who died without ever saying their own names. Not because they did not matter, but because there was no time left to matter to the world. Holy Father, I tell you this, not to awaken horror, but to awaken truth. They did not die as numbers. They did not die as shadows. They did not die forgotten by God. but they died without witnesses. No one stood beside them with a pen. No one recorded their final prayers. No one promised they would be remembered. And so I come to you, not as a victim seeking justice, not as a soul seeking glory, but as a sister asking for memory. They did not die without faith, Holy Father. They died without witnesses. And if the world could not stand with them in their last moments, then let it at least stand with them now, through prayer, through remembrance, through love that refuses to forget. This is why I returned, not to accuse the living, but to give voice to the dead, so that their silence would no longer be empty.
The chapel was silent again, but it was no longer empty. Pope Pius XII stood before the woman who had just given voice to millions of souls, and all the strength he had carried as pontiff seemed to leave him at once. The weight of crowns and titles fell away. In that moment, he was no longer the ruler of the Vatican. He was a priest before suffering he could not heal. Slowly, he sank to his knees, not in ceremony, not in dignity, but in helplessness. His hands trembled as they covered his face, and tears escaped him, not the tears of a diplomat who had lost an argument, but the tears of a shepherd who had lost his flock. Tears for children he would never bless, tears for mothers whose final prayers no bishop would ever hear, tears for souls whose names had vanished before the world had time to learn them. All his life he had been taught to measure words carefully, to weigh every sentence, to guard silence as if it were a weapon. But in that sacred hour, silence became unbearable. He wept, not because history accused him, but because heaven had trusted him. The nun stood before him, her presence gentle and unwavering. No anger lived in her eyes, only sorrow, and something deeper than sorrow, a mission. She spoke softly, yet her words carried the weight of eternity. "Holy Father," she said, "you were accused of silence. I ask you to become their voice before heaven." The Pope lifted his face, tears still tracing the lines of age and burden. In her words, he heard no judgment, only a calling greater than any title he had ever worn. If he could not shout to the world, he would cry out to God. If history refused to listen, he would plead before the throne of mercy. That night, something changed within him. Not the war, not the accusations, not the future debates of scholars and critics, but his purpose. From that moment on, every mass he offered, every prayer he whispered in solitude, every tear he shed in the darkness of his chapel would carry a single intention: to speak for those who no longer could, to remember those the world had forgotten, to stand before heaven as the voice of the silent dead.
Wars are remembered by battles. But some wars leave no monuments, no medals, no victory parades. They are fought in whispers, in shadows, in choices made when no one is watching. While the world measured Pope Pius XII by his public words, another war unfolded quietly within the walls of the church. At night, when Rome slept, convent doors opened, not to welcome pilgrims, but to hide the hunted. Jewish families were guided through narrow corridors lit by a single candle. Children were carried in silence so their footsteps would not betray them. In monasteries, beds meant for monks became refuge for strangers whose only crime was their blood. In Vatican offices, papers were written that would never appear in official archives: baptismal certificates for those who had never been baptized, identity cards for those who no longer had names. Ink became a shield. stamps became a form of resistance. And beyond the city, secret paths were traced, escape routes through forests, over mountains, across borders that should not have been crossed. Priests became messengers, nuns became guardians, ordinary believers became heroes who would never be known. History would later argue whether these acts were enough. Heaven never did. As Pope Pius XII listened to the nun who stood before him, she spoke not as a witness to death, but as a witness to life. "Holy Father," she said gently, "many lived because you chose to act in the dark." Her words were not praise, they were truth. Not every soul could be saved, not every cry could be answered, but thousands lived who would have died if silence had meant inaction. The Pope bowed his head. For years he had carried the burden of what he could not prevent. Now he was reminded of what he had dared to do, even when the cost was misunderstanding, even when the reward was accusation. Some wars are fought with armies, some are fought with courage that never appears on maps, and this was the war no one saw, the war for souls, the war for time, the war for life itself. A war Pope Pius XII never claimed as his own, but one heaven had recorded in every heartbeat saved, every child hidden, every family that walked back into the light because someone, somewhere, had chosen mercy over safety. In that unseen battlefield, silence had not meant surrender. It had meant protection.
Years would pass, and the war would end, but the judgment would not. Long after the smoke of Auschwitz faded from the skies, new fires would be lit in the minds of men. Books would accuse, plays would provoke, films would reopen wounds that had never truly healed. A stage would present the vicar, portraying a pope who watched in silence while the innocent perished. A screen would show Amen, forcing the world to ask again whether caution had become betrayal. Voices would rise not only outside the church, but within it, questioning his conscience, his courage, even his faith. And when the cause for his beatification was opened, the controversy returned with greater force. Many could not understand how a man so often called silent could be lifted as a model of holiness. For them, sanctity required thunder. But heaven does not measure holiness by volume. As Pope Pius XII stood in the quiet of the chapel, the nun before him seemed to see both past and future, the debates that would outlive them both, the accusations that would echo long after his death. She spoke gently, as one who no longer belonged to time. "Holy Father," she said, "the world will always judge what it can see. It will weigh your words. It will count your speeches. It will measure your courage by the noise you made." The Pope lowered his eyes, the weight of those future judgments already heavy upon him. Then her voice softened, and something eternal shone through her sorrow. "But heaven has already judged you," she continued, "not by your silence before men, but by your tears before God." He lifted his gaze. In her eyes, he saw no defense, no excuse, no argument, only truth. "History will judge your words," she said at last. "Heaven has already judged your tears." And in that moment, Pope Pius XII understood something he had long feared and long hoped at once, that he might never be understood on earth, but he would never be unknown in heaven. For there is a court higher than history, and a verdict deeper than reputation. And in that court, no accusation is louder than love, and no defense stronger than compassion offered in silence. The light in the chapel began to change.
It did not grow brighter, it grew gentler. Slowly, the figure of the nun seemed to dissolve into that quiet radiance, not as one who was leaving in sorrow, but as one who had finished her mission. Pope Pius XII rose to his feet, his heart heavy and full at the same time. Before she vanished, she spoke one last time, not as a victim, not as a martyr seeking recognition, but as a soul who carried the voice of millions. "Tell them we were not only victims," she said softly. "Tell them we were souls loved by God." And then she was gone. The chapel returned to silence, but it was no longer the silence of absence, it was the silence of promise. From that night on, Pope Pius XII would continue to be judged by the world. Scholars would debate his choices. Critics would question his courage. History would never reach a single verdict. But in the hidden places of his life, something had changed forever. For from that night forward, every Mass he offered carried a quiet intention. Every prayer he whispered in solitude remembered a people the world had nearly erased. And before heaven, when no one else could hear, the Pope would always add the same plea: for the souls of Israel, for the forgotten dead, for those whose names were lost, but whose lives were never lost to God.